Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue with Zena Ugrinsky from Booz Allen Hamilton. With that, Zena, please join me on stage here. And so she was already on stage this morning as part of Suresh's keynote, so most of you were there maybe, but she's the Senior Vice President leading as far, and she can say that again, analytics really for Booz Allen Hamilton. Intriguing because you're a certified data scientist. We just heard that that might be something which is maybe not that great, but you're certainly someone who takes it into the boardroom, so maybe you can talk about that. I also love you have a lot of background in terms of enterprise performance, and I think that's a very long thread that's been around in the industry as well. Please, over to you.
Okay. You guys hear me? Okay, good. So first of all, Zena Ugrinsky, I introduced myself earlier. Let me just see a quick show of hands. How many here are technologists? Okay. How many business people? All right, good. How many data scientists? Oh, come on, don't be shy now. I know you just got a rough rap, but all right. Good. So we're all here because we are in technology, or we're business people, or the people who are hiding right now are data scientists. But we're here because we're people who intuitively understand that we are on the edge of something that's going to be really transformational. So it could be, and by extension, it's going to be life-altering, right? Life-altering for humanity. So there are two things that I want to do today. One is kind of set the expectation for how long that will actually take to occur. And the second is, how do we accelerate that? What can we do today to make that happen more quickly? So, one interesting thing is I love the fact that data scientists are now, regarded as the next version of like the extreme athletes, right? Data science is widely viewed as the sexiest profession of today, okay? It's interesting that a classification of people who used to be referred to as, dorks and geeks are now being treated like rock stars. It's actually kind of cool. So, so the marketing machine is in full swing, right? And C-level executives are demanding to know what their organizations are doing on this topic, right? It's clear to them that unless they stay ahead of this curve, they run the risk of having their lunch eaten by the competition who's already gotten ahead of them. And worse yet, perhaps they won't even exist in 5 years. But I want to, I want to look at this through the lens of history. And first of all, just a little bit about what we do, boiled down a bit from earlier, and that's we do three things. We do cyber, we do data science and analytics, and we do cloud, right? Why those three? Because anyone who's considering any one of those has to consider the other two as part of it. So our goal is to really take a holistic view of this and try and figure out, so as we're working with folks like Sama and Hortonworks and Microsoft on Azure, how do we bring it all together so it operates like a harmonized machine? Okay. So we all know the challenges that are going on. We're all feeling our way through this for the first time. Everybody's got an opinion, but I think it makes sense to just take a look first at history, right? What were the really transformational things that happened in history that altered the human experience? Because I think we all feel that is where we're going, but how long does that really take to occur? So there's a new book by Robert J. Gordon. It's called The Rise and Fall of American Growth. It's a nice discussion of what was known as the special century. That's 1880 to 1970. And I'm going to focus first on the first part of that, which is 1880 to 1940. So we had some really, unarguably, transformational things that happened. We had the railroad, the steamboat, right, the telegraph, and then with electricity and the automobile, what did that really do? Well, we went from 0% of all households having running water, sewer pipes, gas to cook, refrigeration, central heating, to, by 1940, in excess of 60% of all households had that. It was hugely transformational for the human experience. Okay, on top of that, by that time, 90% of all households had a car. So it kind of kicked off with the first census also during that time, arguably. The first big data set, right? And if you look at the houses that are finally connected by electricity, by water, by gas, that's the first connected house. So sorry, Nest, you're a little late on that. At any rate, to measure the impact of these events on society as a whole, this is a measure. TFP was used in this study instead of GDP because it does a better job of taking into account not just the improvements of standard of living, but the impact of human activity, and GDP is underrepresented. So jumping ahead, you can see that it really took about 4 decades for significant productivity gains to be experienced. So by extension, now look at the 60s, that's where mainframes started coming in. A little later, the PC and the internet, and that's kind of where I stepped in to the story. So I was in banking early on, I was in finance. I was one of those people who was issued a PC, didn't have a hard drive. Right, I was flipping floppies to get my spreadsheet to go, and I thought a spreadsheet was like the best thing ever, because didn't have to use green bar paper anymore, right? Dating myself, but it's been interesting to watch the entire progression. So where were the productivity gains that came out of mainframes and PCs and the internet? It was mainly in the business world, but fundamentally what they were doing was automating processes that were already in place. So when people ask, and in fact, in the book, he tries to address this, with all the technology that we use every day and we buy and modernize, where are the associated productivity gains? Well, the reality is we're applying it to things that already exist. So what do we use our smartphones and our tablets for? Information, communication, entertainment, right? We're not doing anything new. We're just doing it differently. So I would say it's a lot more fun to consume entertainment on a tablet than it might have been to listen to the radio in the 30s, but you're not doing anything new with it. So let's jump ahead to the age of big data. Well, it's going to change everything, right? So you've got a couple of technology futurists like Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee who have said these are the 5 areas that are really going to be impacted by what we can do with technology and data today. Well, I would argue that all of those we can incrementally improve, but we're not going to make a massive shift. So if you take medicine, if you look at life expectancy increases in the first section of the special century, we went from a life expectancy of 42 to 75, right? Well, we're putting out better medicines. We may be able to impact or eliminate cancer, right? Coronary disease, but it's not going to make us live to 140 or 130, right? Robots were invented by GM in 1961 to do an activity in a repetitive way. So what are we challenged with today in the improvements of robotics? Articulation, right? How do we make it autonomous so it does what it's supposed to do without a whole lot of human interaction? But the reality is we still can't build a robot that can take a pile of laundry, fold it, and put it away properly without human intervention. Right? So what we have are robotic improvements that are making them cute, sort of like additional entertainment, and maybe things like mechanical pets to soothe the elderly, right, that don't need a whole lot of care, but nothing fundamentally different. 3D printing, usually transformational. It's a nice invention. I have a number of friends who bought 3D printers, and candidly, they printed out like 3 or 4 things, and now it's just sitting there. So it was a bit of a novelty. It's not going to alter mass production anytime soon. You know, there's some work to do there. Autonomous cars. This is one we're all talking about, right? So what is that really going to mean for the user, for the human? It means that we no longer have to focus on the windshield. We can focus on our little glass screen and do a little more of information gathering, communicating, and entertaining ourselves. I think there'll be, there's likely to be an impact to real estate. We no longer have to have a place to park all those one-driver vehicles all day long. But the challenges that we're still up against in autonomous vehicles is it has to process so much information when it, for example, gets to an intersection and goes through an intersection, that until all cars are autonomous, they're going to go really slow. So, but just a word of warning, if you like to drive fast like I do, get it in now. So ultimately, again, we're just doing more of the same. Now, big data and AI. Okay, I'm not going to touch the artificial intelligence thing. There's a whole lot of discussion about, whether robots are going to get so smart that they're just going to kill off us squishy little humans because they don't need us. What's interesting is that some of the brightest minds of our time are actually very concerned about it. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Big data, though. Well, we know it's revolutionized marketing, right? We've gone from mass marketing to individual marketing. We know it now chases us around so that, it's changed how we consume. So we are actively marketed to. But if you think about it, I'm still buying things. I may be buying them differently. They may be delivered to me differently. But I haven't really changed things all that much. So now let's go and jump ahead to what does it mean for the business community, right? We are hearing a lot of stories from, in some cases, folks who are here, but you hear a lot of use cases around how big data and our capability to analyze it differently and using more mature analytic methods and generating competitive advantage for ourselves. It's becoming, and thank you to many of the panelists. I mean, you're going to hear some reoccurring themes here, right? So it was really the CMO who got the most benefit from these things, but it is quickly becoming a conversation across the C-suite. And part of the challenge that I run into when I'm helping clients think through their strategies in these areas is the first thing that I have to do is I have to create a common language for them to communicate. Because what it means, let's take omni-channel, right? A retailer who's trying to go omni-channel. The concerns of the Chief Information Security Officer, the concerns of the CFO, the CRO, you know, their perception of what big data is varies significantly. So they can't get to a point where they can decide on a course forward where they've all agreed on how much risk is safe to assume, what are the investments they want to make, where are the opportunities, how does this impact the strat plan. So that has remained fairly constant. That's the first thing we have to do when we go in and have a strategic conversation around how a client can really transform their organization using data. I mean, even for some of the more prominent players in the big data space, and particularly when I speak to, you guys have seen this, I'm sure, right? So when I speak to the CFO, that person is saying to me, well, I'm writing a lot of checks. It kind of feels like data warehousing all over again, where 5 years I spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and after 5 years I was getting maybe a 2% return on my investment. So the reality is, this is where most people are experimenting. But when I speak to the C-suite, this is where they live, right? This is where the business is. All the people who are executing on the strategy are living in spreadsheets, data warehousing, BI. Maybe they really got smart and they implemented OLAP. So this is actually important because that was sort of the first shift I saw in how business people interacted with data. Because people went from having a spreadsheet or a set of reports to suddenly having a database that had more data than they've ever had access to, and they could slice and dice it just like it was a Rubik's Cube and answer any question they needed to. The next big event was the ability to write back in a way that wasn't coding, right? So I could write a business algorithm, and this was really the thing that catapulted this concept of driver-based modeling, for example, and breakback. So I could start making assumptions at the level of corporate Alcoa and change some assumptions and have it ripple down through everything, right? That was never even possible before. And what that caused in the end user community is the need to advance from thinking in 3 dimensions to thinking in 5, 6, 10. The human brain kind of shuts down at 11, right? After that, it's just, you can't process it. But that was during a time that people were getting fascinated and really chasing this concept of enterprise performance management. So Gartner calls it corporate performance management, Forrester calls it enterprise performance management, some of the software vendors call it business performance management, fundamentally all the same thing. It's, I've got a bunch of data in transaction processing systems, I need to be able to analyze it, and it's all sitting in silos. I might have a data warehouse on top of that or next to it. How do I deliver that to our end users in a way that they can use and ask questions, speed of thought? And so there's a lot of confusion right now about what do we do about big data? What does it mean to us? And what is the definition of it? I've found that when you tie it back to that concept of EPM and analytics that people have been chasing for decades, and you show them as just another point on the evolution of what we can do with our data to make better business decisions, to influence strategy, it kind of demystifies it. One point that's probably worth noting is even those folks who adopted OLAP, still never really let go of those spreadsheets, okay? And I don't think Bill Gates ever expected that, major corporations in the US would all be run on spreadsheets, but trust me, they still are. So how do we enable the end users, and this was actually brought up in the panel just now, how do we take the end users and help them make the leap to where they need to be in their skill sets to address this? That's the competency gap, right? And if you think about it, leadership is asking, how do I take my entire organization and move it to the right-hand side? So how do I address that competency gap? So the first thing that most technologists will say is, well, we're going to build a data lake, right? That might take us a year or two, And in fact, I've got clients who've come to us after the fact and said, okay, we built this awesome data lake. No one's using it. It was kind of like they built it and no one came. Well, why is that? They didn't involve the business community from day one. It's not like a business user can say, well, let me do a quick reconciliation of what I used to have and what I now have in this data lake and just tie it out real quick so I know I can trust it, right? Not possible. Also, the technology is different. So there are new skills they have to learn. Another hurdle. And then something that's really important, and people keep forgetting this in the whole topic of the data scientist, is if you have IT build a data lake, and then you set a bunch of data scientists loose in it, they have a 50-50 shot of getting the insight wrong, or chasing down the wrong signals, or finding correlations that might exist but are meaningless. And unless you flank them with somebody who is deep in the business, who has a ton of experience, who can help them refine what the questions should be, you're not going to get the value out of it. So when a CFO or a CXO says, so how many data scientists do I need to hire? I'm like, none, right? Let's figure out what questions you need to answer, figure out how to answer them, put it in production, and then ongoing, you'll know what kind of a data science capability you need to build. The other thing that's happening is for the last couple of years, I've gotten the question, not just the question, how many data scientists do I have to hire, but what does the business analyst of the future look like? So what's really happening is, now you hear a lot about a shortage of data scientists. Well, I would argue that we've heard from a number of folks today that there are armies of business analysts out there, right? Those will be the next data scientists. I'm not technically an MIT mathematician. I'm a financial analyst who started building things because I needed them to get my job done. Okay, so, understanding that this is really important, I started studying things, right? So let's take an example. So, C-level person says, I have 100 business analysts. 10 of those are my strat ops folks, right? They have access to everything. They may have access also to statistical packages. I give them the best tools. They support the M&A analysis. They support decisions I'm making against capital asset allocation. What we're going to have to do in the future is figure out, how do I take the other 90 and make them look more like the 10? And the reality is, not all of those 90 are going to ever be able to get there. I suspect that if you can get 60 of them there, you're going to get so much benefit that you're not going to have to fill that gap. So this is where you begin to build the new business analyst. And this is an approach that we've taken, quite a bit. This is one that we work with Sama on. We're not going to build a ginormous data lake. We're going to build a data puddle. But we're only going to do it, to an earlier point, we're going to find one question. One question that a business user says, if I could answer this question, it would be hugely material for us. I've never been able to do it. Find that question, put a data puddle in place, take a group of users who care about that question, educate them enough, train them so that they can exploit the data that's in the data puddle, and then ask the second question or the next 20 and use that as a mechanism for enriching your data lake. Now you're building something, but you're showing value every step of the way, and you're using it as a mechanism to take your user community and retool them. I think the next thing that's really important is, okay, I built a data puddle, it's now a bigger data puddle, it's a pond, and we're aspirationally going to make it into a data lake. And I have discovered things that I had no idea existed that are truly meaningful for us. Now what? If you don't connect it back to all the old stuff you have, you're not going to be able to do what the gentleman from Wells Fargo said, which is take action. How do you now tie it back? You may need to collect new things in your transaction processing systems. You might need to incorporate this into your forecasting capability, right? Existing technology. You might need to be able to hold accountable people for the behavioral changes you need to execute against the adjusted strategy that is the result of the insights that you gleaned from your data lake. So creating an environment where it becomes an iterative improvement system, that's where you're going to start really seeing the ROI from the investments you're making. So start small, right? So the other thing is really putting a strategy in place on how to get there, right? It involves people and change. It involves infrastructure. I mean, I gave the analogy, or not the analogy, but an example earlier of, the best situation is when we have a partner like Hortonworks, a partner like Sama, with a tool set that begins to make it easier for users to consume. Microsoft to optimize the cost of keeping it and maintaining it, and someone like Booz Allen Hamilton that can kind of wrapper the whole thing and help you figure out how do you create the business analyst of the future as you're going through this process. And what are all the other organizational changes that need to be made as you're going through that journey? So I want to highlight something that just happened last Sunday? Last Sunday. Sunday, New York Times. Yep, okay, I'm done. CEO of AT&T famously just came out with a mandate for his organization. He said, evolve or be left behind. So the quote is, there's a need to retool yourself and you should not expect to stop. People who do not spend 5 to 10 hours a week in online learning will be obsolete. Okay, this, kudos to a CEO who's putting money where his mouth is. He's investing $8,000 in every single person in AT&T with the expectation that they will do this, not on AT&T's time. They'll fund it, right? But this is, I believe, a trend that you're going to start seeing more and more C-level executives put in place because it's the only accelerator you have. Otherwise, we're back in data warehousing and BI, and we may have a whole lot of shelfware. But if you can retool the end users to exploit what's possible now, it's going to lead to tremendous competitive advantage for those folks who get it right. So coming full circle, ultimately, our ability to evolve our user base is the engine that's going to allow us to more quickly realize the gains possible of the technology we have today and that we will have tomorrow. Thank you.